In my previous video, I asked people who may or may not identify themselves as Islamophobes what they believe Islam to be. In other words, what are the defining characteristics of Islam, the Islamic world, or whatever. Generally, I find that when people go to define Islam, they go to the sacred texts or the semi-sacred texts of Islam, say the Quran, the Hadiths, the texts on Sharia law, things like that. Okay, so then they point to bits in there that say Muhammad was a pedophile, or that Islam actually says that adulteresses should be stoned to death, or that Muhammad planned or was involved in the murder of 600 people, or genocide against Jews, or things like this. And a lot of people that are Islamophobic or that are harshly critical of Islam have gotten quite an interesting repertory of quotes and terminology, which I bet that they never would have thought about pursuing prior to 9/11. But anyway, that wasn't very nice of me. But one wonders why they bring these things up, because the same people will almost certainly tell you that they believe all this to be a bunch of superstitious mumbo-jumbo. That believing that human beings were created by God out of clots of blood is, malarkey, that's crazy. That believing that the angel Gabriel came and recited the Holy Quran to Muhammad is evidence that, Muhammad must have had something seriously wrong with him. I won't say what normally gets said, but generally his mental health is questioned or whatever. The whole thing is dismissed as just a pile of superstitious foolishness from the Middle Ages. Okay, well, you can't use it as an authoritative source on the one hand and then dismiss it as a pile of foolishness on the other. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in between, which is generally where I find the truth usually lies. Which is why I think that people who say that Muslims follow the whole thing literally are missing the point. It's virtually impossible to follow any set of instructions to the letter. Everything needs to be interpreted, because that's just the way that language works. For example, there's the case of Muhammad's alleged pedophilia. Well, the appropriate texts are pointed to by the harsh critics of Islam, and it's not as though this issue hasn't been dealt with thoroughly by Islamic scholars throughout the ages. DawahFilms just did a very exhaustive study of that very one issue. But then, when they do that, they're accused of waffling and taking the literal meaning of the words and fooling around with it. But those same people just said that all Muslims believe literally in exactly what the Quran says. So that's just one little example. You can't say that all Muslims believe the literal truth of what is written in the sacred texts or the holy texts, and then say at the same time that they fool around with the meanings and try and massage things. They do the one or they do the other, or maybe they do both, and the truth lies somewhere in between. It's never as simple as we think it is. In fact, it is not possible in the very nature of things to be as simple as we think they are, or as we perhaps want them to be. Muslims are just as multifaceted, and their culture is just as nuanced, just as complex, just as potentially contradictory as anyone else's. It's over 1,400 years old, and it has antecedents that go back much farther than that. It's been, as I say, dozens of civilizations have risen and fallen, and they all had their own scholars, which said potentially contradictory things about everything. But that comes out in any type of philosophy, even in atheism and in free thinking. So you cannot expect people to be consistent or accuse them of over-consistency on the one hand, and then accuse them of being inconsistent on the other. Unless, of course, you're just trying to cast them in any given situation in the worst possible light. And that, when applied to a group that large and that identifiable, is racism. Thank you.